Welcome back to another episode of the Jacob Johnston Show. Before I get into everything here, I'm just going to go ahead and let you know that I'm switching it up when it comes to video. When it comes to the video content, I'm only going to be providing short, focused on one topic. If you want more comprehensive coverage and discussion and views, go ahead and subscribe to the audio version of the podcast, link in the description below. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this. All right, because there's two things I want to cover. First off, CNN is out there once again trying to accuse the right that which the Democrats do. They do this all the time, where the Democrats and left-wing media engages in certain conduct. And then they go out there and they try to blame their ideological opponents for what they do. So the Democrats are always trying to blame the Republicans or accuse the Republicans of crimes and scandals committed by the Democrats. And left-wing media tries to go out there and accuse right-wing media of engaging in the same type of conduct as the left-wing media. So here's what the Clown News Network sounds like as they try to once again attack Fox News and try to claim Fox News is doing what CNN is doing.
Politicians can't rewrite history on their own. They need enablers. They need media enablers. And that's what the GOP has right now, thanks to right-wing outlets that look the other way and ignore the daily fallout from January 6th.
The Republican Party's decision, in effect, to excommunicate Liz Cheney is a watershed event. It marks the final transformation of the party from an ideologically driven enterprise to one that is tribal, marked less by ideas and more by group loyalty.
Now, what I want to know is how they keep a straight face when they are promoting that crap. Now, when we take a look at what happened on January 6th at the nation's capital, that has been vastly overhyped. Take a look at the video and you see less disorderly conduct and more people just wandering around lost as if they were on a school field trip. And of course, they took pictures of themselves, sitting behind some desk, so forth. And there's a lot of things that have come out. Now, of course, all the right-wing leaders on that day were saying, we need to be peaceful. We're going to be gathering over here in this area. And, there's a whole lot of things that have come out that we've discussed many times on the previous episodes, but they are right. You can't rewrite history. Politicians can't rewrite history without the help of the media. And the Democrats are always rewriting history, and CNN, who has been caught numerous times on camera, by undercover journalists admitting that they deliberately lied to the public, that they run propaganda, that they spin the news in order to try and favor the Democrats. We see how they've rewritten the history of, police shooting events. We saw how they've, are going out there and trying to rewrite history of the Trump administration, how they covered up for all of the crimes and scandals of the Obama administration. The left-wing media is everything that they are accusing Fox News of being. And when we take a look at it, the Republicans are the party of ideas. We have a philosophy and we debate ideas in order to try and find the best ideas. It is the Democrats that are tribal. It is the Democrats that have engaged in absolutism, that you must bow to them or be destroyed. They have long abandoned any debate of ideas. And so just keep this in mind, how they're always trying to accuse their ideological opponents, that which themselves are engaged in, as we go on and discuss what is going on in Israel, with terrorist groups like Hamas. And it's interesting how the Democrats always go off and try to defend terrorists, whether that's international terrorists or domestic terrorists. And they always try to find a way to hide the terrorists behind other human shields. When we talk about what's going on in Israel, they want to say it's Israel and Palestine when really it's Hamas, a terrorist group, and Israel's response to being attacked. And of course, you got the Democrats out there like AOC trying to find ways to defend terrorists. I mean, it's no surprise they defend domestic terrorism, so it's not that big of a leap for them to go off and try and defend international terrorism. So here's how they're trying to spin the coverage, and see, after we get past AOC, when we get to the journalists, if you can point out the complete and total dishonesty in the coverage. Take a look.
This is about an imbalance of power. The president and many other figures this week stated that Israel has a right to self-defense. But do Palestinians have a right to survive?
A rocket exploded about 20 yards from where we're standing right now. The majority of the population of Israel, Martha, has experienced the sirens and the explosions. The family here was having its Sabbath meal. They heard the sirens, managed to sprint to a bomb shelter, but a man across the street was killed. Now, civilians on both sides have borne the brunt of this. Overnight, the fiercest Israeli attack on the Gaza Strip that we've seen so far. Palestinian health officials reporting more than 33 dead, the majority of them women and children. Parts of Gaza today, Martha, look like a moonscape.
Completely and totally dishonest coverage. I mean, what they have done here is taken the whole Republicans pounce narrative that they always use in order to hide Democrat scandals and applied it internationally to what's going on in Israel with Hamas and the Palestinians. See, the story is not that, Hamas and, the Palestinians engaged in terrorism and attacked Israel. No, the story is Israel's response to the attack. Now, AOC wants to go off and say this is about power imbalance. Of course, they always try to go off and try and, create some sort of narrative. Power imbalance, some sort of injustice, trying to make it look like this is some sort of civil rights issue. And I don't know who is dumber here, AOC or the people who elected that moron and re-elected that moron. All right, so I really can't figure out who the bigger idiot is there. Does Palestinians have the right to exist? Sure. Do they have the right to attack Israel? No. The story, again, is like the Republican pounce. It's not that, Israel was attacked. It's Israel responded to the attack, and that's the problem. And then when we get to ABC's this week's coverage, what do? They frame it as Israel's attack on the Gaza Strip. Israel's attack, not Israel's defense, not Israel's counter. You see how they always try to use manipulative language and spin in order to try and frame the narrative. And the narrative is Israel is going to be the aggressor. We're going to report negatively on Israel for daring to respond and defend themselves. Now, it's interesting because what we had seen here is a story about how America media outlets like the AP shared the same office building as these terrorist groups, and they claim they didn't know about it. For years and years, these terrorists were planning their attacks, what was it, a couple floors below or a couple floors above, the left-wing media. And they didn't know, and yet then they wanted, they're serious journalism, they're watchful, they're observant, and they didn't realize that terrorists were planning terrorist attacks in the same building in which their journalists operated out of. Go figure. And then you wonder how much of the narrative about Israel and the anti-Israel sentiment in the media has been shaped out of sharing an office building with terrorist groups. How much were they spoon-fed Hamas and terrorist propaganda in order to report negative coverage against Israel? And how far to the extreme left has the media gone that terrorists seem like mainstream viewed people, average people with no suspicion whatsoever. And yet those who believe in the traditional values, the traditions of a particular country, are considered the extremists. I mean, they do the same thing here in the United States, where they go off and they try to normalize and claim mainstream is, extremist views are mainstream views are extremist, turn everything flip-flop upside down, and they promote the propaganda of domestic terrorist groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And so we saw that, going on. Now they tried to claim they didn't know. They said, there was no evidence. Of course, the evidence has since been provided. But it makes you wonder how much of their coverage has been biased by the fact that they were being spoon-fed or having conversations with terrorist groups in their own office building. Unbelievable. But they're always out there trying to frame it in the response is the scandal, not the scandal itself. Just like here at home. The Democrats engage in the scandal. The Republicans talk about that scandal and, go off and want to expose the scandal. And then the media reports the story. The story isn't about the scandal of the Democrats, but the Republicans pounce. The Republicans' response. So when Hamas and terrorist groups attack Israel, that's not the story. Israel responding and defending itself, that's the story. That's the scandal. And of course, the media wants to go off and try and find a way to blame President Trump, for this, trying to say that this was failure of Trump policy and that this is Biden's first foreign policy challenge. No, that is another fictional narrative. This is another situation in which Biden has already screwed the pooch, created chaos, and this is here. Just go ahead and take a look at the video, and then we'll discuss it on the other side.
Donald Trump and his son-in-law Jared Kushner were behind the so-called Abraham Accords between Israel and some Arab neighbors. Donald Trump said that would mean the dawn of a new Middle East, but that certainly has not happened.
Yeah, and this was something that was seen as a huge, at least among Republicans anyway, a huge feather in the cap of Donald Trump when it came to international diplomacy and Middle East issues. The president said that this was the foundation for comprehensive peace potentially in the entire region. It wasn't just the Republicans, though. The Biden administration supported this. Tony Blinken came out and said that this was something he would like to see expanded and have other Arab nations in the regions join. I think a lot of experts are seeing what's happening now, given all the violence, and think the likelihood of more countries joining on to these accords is slim to none. What we're seeing from the Biden administration right now is they are walking this very fine line. They are very much pushing private diplomatic diplomacy. That is their goal right now. But a lot of folks are very critical of the administration, particularly in their own party. You're seeing folks like Bernie Sanders come out and not happy with the president. They would like to see them take a more forceful tone in support of Palestine and the issues that are happening in Gaza right now. But right now, you're seeing a very traditional approach from the Biden administration.
And was critical, Biden was, of many of Donald Trump's policies. He hasn't taken big steps to reverse a lot of them. And they've had this very muted response this week. It's getting them some pushback. The question now is, how long can this really last?
What am I supposed to say here? The media is complete and total dishonesty. So what we are actually seeing here is the difference between the competent, effective, and successful leadership of Trump and the complete incompetency and chaos under that fraud Biden. And we see this all the time here. Now, they want to go off and say, well, Biden is not undoing Trump's policies fast enough, and that's the problem. No, the problem is he is undoing Trump's policies. This is the same thing as what we saw when it came to the border. All the so-called experts, and only in the left can you be wrong 100% of the time and still be considered an expert. So we saw this where there was a crisis at the border, for pretty much the entire Obama administration. Obama, put kids in cages and all of that. And of course, they tried to blame Trump for all the kids that were put in cages during the Obama administration. It is the complete and total dishonesty. But Trump came into office. He signaled that, hey, if you come here illegally, you will be deported. So don't even bother. He pushed building the wall. And what did we see? Over the course of 4 years, we saw illegal immigration hit its lowest levels. We saw the border under control. we saw a problem that has been going on for decades on the verge of being completely solved, and had been mostly solved. And then Biden comes into office, undoes Trump's policies, and it results in complete chaos. We have a crisis again. This is going to be the hallmark of the Biden administration. Trump, having been so successful at solving problems, Biden undoing it and reintroducing chaos and crisis everywhere he goes. It's a complete and total dumpster fire. And so we see the same thing in the Middle East. Under Trump's policies, we saw funding to terrorist groups and organizations cut off. We financially, ended their ability, or, virtually ended their ability to carry out terrorist attacks. Trump signaled that he wasn't going to play footsies with the terrorists when he dropped a Moab in the early days of his administration, the mother of all bombs. And after he did that, what happened? The Middle East calmed down. North Korea even calmed down, because he wasn't going to play footsie. He wasn't going to play games with them. He made it very clear what he would do. Very strong stance. And then as a result, we saw the most peaceful and stable time in the Middle East that we have witnessed in my lifetime. And we saw peace deals and peace agreements, breaking out peace, in the Middle East. It was on the verge of being completely and totally solved. And then what happened? Biden comes into office and starts rolling back Trump's policies that led to such success. Biden went back to the days of Obama of funding international terrorists. And you know what? It's no surprise that, with them supporting domestic terrorism, that they would support international terrorism. So Biden restored the finances and funding, to Iran, the biggest promoter and financier of international terrorism, or at least Middle East terrorism. And so Biden restores the funding, and surprise, surprise, all of a sudden, terrorists in the Middle East suddenly have money again to engage in terrorist attacks. And what do? They attack Israel, and then Israel responds. And of course, it's the Republicans' pounce narrative that they're trying to go off in order to demonize Israel and trying to frame everything as Israel is the aggressor. We see this all the time. It's just a complete dumpster fire with Biden. And they want to go off and say this is Biden's first foreign policy challenge. No, that is wrong. Biden already had his first foreign policy challenge. And what we are seeing is the results of him failing that test. His first foreign policy test, when he rolled back Trump's policies regarding Iran. And what we are seeing is the results of that. Biden's already failed, and we're seeing the dumpster fire develop as a result. We're seeing chaos coming back to where stability was finally developing. How many more dumpster fires, how many more crises can Biden create in such a short period of time? He was only installed fraudulently into the White House back in January. It is May, and we have seen dumpster fire after dumpster fire, crisis after crisis, failure after failure. He has done more damage in under 5 months than we have ever witnessed anybody do in a single term. God, somebody get this guy out of the White House. He doesn't even belong in the White House. All right, get him out of there. He is just completely destroying everything he touches. And the media, again, going back to the very beginning, of CNN, the media is rewriting history, rewriting, what the story is, trying to twist everything in order to support their narrative, their propaganda, their tribal views. Because there's no honesty in the left-wing media. It's all propaganda and gaslighting in order to support Democrats, no matter how disastrous the Democrats are. And CNN has been caught on video admitting to that. All right, so that's it for this particular episode. Well, it's not a full episode, just a little bit of a clip here. Going forward here, the video content is really just going to cover one particular issue, one particular story. And if you want more comprehensive, podcast, where I go through multiple stories at much greater length, a traditional, hour-long show, then go ahead and subscribe to the audio version of the podcast. The link is in the description below. Thank you so much, and I will be back again soon.